Welcome to this cybersecurity breakout session. As many of you know, cybersecurity has become a major problem, especially in our high-tech economy, and businesses are constantly having to defend themselves against cyber threats and in order to uphold their promises to their customers. So this session will focus on the latest efforts in cybersecurity, including business security strategies, vulnerability analysis, incident tracking, and other efforts to ensure the behavioral and technical security of your organization. And here to talk to us today is Michael Savoie, Dean of the College of Tech and Computing at Utah Valley University. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. Couple of things here. So I'm going to stand because I don't like to sit. And as you can probably tell, I have a cold. So I will be taking sips of water as we talk. So I apologize for that. What I want to do for this session is a couple of things. I want to talk to you just for a couple of minutes about what's happening in cyber and where we are and things that are going on. And then I'd really like to open it up for questions and see what issues you're dealing with and really talk to you about what we're seeing in some of the latest stuff that's going on. So cyber is such a huge area that we really I don't want to take a tremendous amount of time. I'd really like to hear what your issues are, what your concerns are, what your questions are, and go from there. So just as kind of a lead into that, about 10 or 15 years ago, cybercrime was this crime of speed. If you remember back, we likened it a lot to like stealing an automobile. It was get in, get what you wanted and get out before you got caught. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, as broadband started to proliferate, cybercrime changed. And instead of being a crime of speed, where you kind of went in and you just hit hard at the front door, grabbed what you needed to grab and get out, cybercrime changed and it became more of a stealth mode type of crime. Probably the most famous case of this was what the Chinese did with the United Nations, where they went in and they installed spyware on the United Nations servers. And for 3 years, the spyware simply copied every document that the UN put on the servers and made a copy of it and sent the copy to China. And the UN didn't catch it because what China was doing was they were putting the spyware in where it was below the levels where any of the automated tools would catch it. So it would what's called dribble the data out. So it wouldn't go high speed or anything else. It would just use broad bandwidth and it would kind of run the data out as different documents over the just standard transfer of traffic to and from the servers. And when they finally caught it, it was interesting because while there was a big uproar about what was done, the question became, did they actually commit a crime? Because China's comment on it was, well, first off, we're not claiming responsibility for it. But secondly, what they said was, prove that we did something that hindered or damaged or did anything else. And they said, well, you stole documents that weren't yours. And they said, well, we didn't steal them, we just copied them. And it was interesting to watch the dynamics at play because, quite honestly, there was no international law that prevented them from copying the documents. And so it was a very interesting case study in terms of what was the crime that was actually committed. Was there a crime committed, I guess, first off? And then what actually was the crime that was committed? And so when that happened, we'd already been working on a bunch of stuff in cyber to address the change in cybercrime, but it really highlighted for a lot of companies where their problems lie. And so we went from the idea of build a big firewall and prevent people from grabbing your data to this idea of they're probably already behind your firewall. How do you find out if they're there? And then from there, we moved into an area where we started talking about what's called vulnerability analysis. And so I did a lot of work on this with the federal government, with NSA and stuff, around vulnerability analysis. And the idea of vulnerability analysis is that you go into an organization and you look at where they are most vulnerable for cybercrime. And it may be in a lot of different places, but where are they most vulnerable? And you do what's called an asset analysis or an asset inventory. You look at all of the cyber assets someone has. You identify on a scale It could be a scale from 1 to 100, or, different companies do it different ways, but you would identify the vulnerability matrix that goes with that, with each one of the assets. And then based on that, you could look at it and go, okay, the most likely place that I'm going to get hacked is here. And it may be a server, it may be a website, it could be places where employees are doing certain things and stuff. And you would look at that and go, that's the place I'm most likely to get hacked. And so my focus needs to be on those areas. It can't be not on the other areas, but you need to recognize where your hacks are going to take place. So for an example, JP Morgan Chase is a good example of this. They transfer literally trillions of dollars a year back and forth on their servers. It's not actual currency if you think of dollars, it's electronic currency, and they go back and forth. But electronic currency can be stolen electronically. And so they had $30 million taken out of an electronic vault in New York, and the money disappeared. And they had to trace it back to find out what happened. Well, what happened was they were doing all these transfers, and it was large data file transfers, spreadsheets, and various other things. And someone simply embedded in one of the spreadsheets a cyber file that went in and sat there dormant until I think it sat dormant for about 3 weeks, until there was what it felt was the perfect time to transfer, and then it transferred the money when it thought, quote, the network wasn't looking. So very interesting types of crimes and stuff that we deal with. The interesting part of this, though, is that today, where we are today, is that the biggest problem we have with cybersecurity today is not the technical side, it's the behavioral side. And so if you think about it, the technical side is the servers and the all of the technology that goes with it. The behavioral side is you, okay? So how many of you have your password and it's password, right? Or it's 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? That's the biggest problem we have. I mean, still today on Gawker, according to Gawker, the number one password in use in the world is the word password, all lowercase. That's still the number one password in the world. The second most common password is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? And it drives me crazy because my older brother is an orthopedic surgeon, and I was talking about this one day, and he looked at me and he said, "That's my password, 1, 2, 3, 4." And I told him, I said, "You're an idiot." And he just got to go, it's easy to remember. And I went, "Yeah, I understand. It's also easy to hack. I mean, anybody can hack that." But the other problem is this. So when we realized that we had all these behavioral problems, we started with and y'all probably have been there in some of your companies, where you kind of, all of a sudden you had to change your password every 6 months, and then every 6 weeks, and then every 2 weeks, things like that. And if you have to change your password every 2 weeks, and it's got to have a symbol and an uppercase, lowercase, and a couple of numbers, what are the chances you're going to remember to change every 2 weeks? I mean, you're going to change it every 2 weeks. What are the chances you're going to remember your password? Almost none. And so what do you end up doing? You write it down, right? Most of you wrote it down on a sticky note. If you worked in an office where you had a desk with one of those sliding panels, that's where it was. I used to have the best time going into companies, and I'd go, "Give me 20 minutes and I'll hack your network." And they'd go, "How are you going to do that?" I said, "Just trust me on this." And I'd walk around and I'd open every drawer, flip over keyboards and stuff, and what did I always find? Somebody had written down their password. I had a lot of companies I went into where the password was actually taped to the monitor. Those are easy ones, right? The password is right there. One of the biggest hacks of student records in history occurred because a company went in. The way they stole the records was they went to the company. They went not to the company, but they went to the cleaning service for the company and convinced the cleaning service to take a weekend off, right, that they were going to be a different cleaning company and they were going to cover for them. And so they went in the offices on a Friday afternoon after the offices had closed and went into the offices. The offices were all open. They had access keys to everything. They went in, they opened every computer up, they stole every hard drive out of every computer. What they did on Friday. The company found out about it on Monday morning when they showed up to turn their computers on and nothing worked. Okay? The bad part of the hack wasn't that they got all the hardware. That was an interesting hack. I mean, it wasn't cyber, if the way you think about it. But what was interesting was that when we did the post-mortem on it, and they found a couple of people, talked to them about what they had done in the company, almost every person in the company had their password either taped to their desk in a drawer, under the keyboard or something. So as they stole the hard drives, what did they also take? The access codes, right? 40 million student loan records. Now, if you think about a student loan record has what in it? Everything. It's going to have your social security number. If you're 18, it's going to have your parents' social security numbers. It's going to have their tax ID numbers. It's going to have your bank account numbers. Anybody here ever filled out a FAFSA? If you filled out a FAFSA, I mean, the federal government asks for everything. And so, when you get all of that information goes into your student loans. And so this was a huge hack, 40 million records. Okay? Interesting way to do it. The other big hack in student record was 17 million records. This one I really liked, because this is the one where you just go, you know what, I know how to do this. They drove a pickup truck through the wall of a building, threw the servers in the back of the pickup truck, and took off, right? That's what they did. And by the time they found the pickup truck and the servers, they had used crowbars and pried open all the servers, stole all the hard drives, and they were gone. 17 million records. Now, the trick to this hack, this occurred in North Carolina, and the trick to this hack was very good, because the building was a very nondescript building. There were no signs on the walls or anything else, yet they knew which wall to drive through to have access to the servers that were behind the wall. So we knew it was what? An inside job. Right? And so as we interviewed all the people involved in it, it became obvious, and we ended up arresting a bunch of people for it, for the hacks and stuff. But 17 million records, that's one of the easy ways to do it. So the point of this is that cybercrime is not generally what you would think of as somebody just going in and stealing a record, or going in and hacking in and then just grabbing and going, just a grab and go type scenario. There are dozens of different ways to do this now. It's incredibly complex in the software that's out there to be able to do this. So for instance, we now have software that can emulate other software, which is one of my favorite ones, because what happens is if you get one of these, it will go dormant. It'll come in, maybe it'll look like a JPEG file. It'll come in, you'll download it, you'll see the picture. But what happens is when you download it, you look at the picture, it actually kind of crawls out the back of the picture and goes dormant on your hard drive. So every time you run a scan, it'll go dormant, so the scan doesn't pick it up. Or it'll pretend to be a Word document, or it'll pretend to be a picture or something, and your scanning software won't pick it up. And then when you're not scanning, it'll open up, and generally what these do is they copy files. And then as you go to the internet, either sending email or surfing the web or whatever, they'll piggyback on data packets as they go off your computer through the firewall, so that you don't catch them as they go through. So one of the things we've done in most data centers now, which you have alarm systems that will tell you if you're transferring more than X amount of data, the alarms will go off and tell you that there's a problem. Now, I told you that the biggest problem we have today is behavioral, right? So 97% of all cybercrime today is behavioral based. Okay, 97%. That means only 3% is really technology. 97% of it is behavioral based. And this is an example of what we're talking about. So if you have a data center and you have all your machines, and you're monitoring data flow, data packet flow in and out of the network and across the firewalls and stuff, the idea is that you would have alarms set so that if there was more data flowing than what the alarms would go off. Okay? So if you really want this to work, you have to set the alarms where? Very low threshold, right? So that if you get a couple of kilobytes, couple of data, megabytes above what you're supposed to be, the alarm goes off. But if you're a data center manager and your alarms are going off 70 times a day, what are you going to do? You're going to raise that threshold, because you're going to go, I can't work like this. So you raise the threshold. As you start to raise the threshold, what happens to that gap? The gap between what you're really sending and when the alarm is going to go off. It gets larger and larger and larger. And software today, cyber software, the hacking software, knows how big that bandwidth is. And it'll sit and rest right in that bandwidth. And so we deal with these hacks, these different hacks all the time of what's happening. And there's a lot that we're doing to address it, but it's a very complex issue. It's a very robust issue. Because like I said, we still have today major hacks that are occurring because someone left a password, on their desk, or they left I'll give you a great one. I was on a flight to Sweden, excuse me, about a month ago, and the guy in front of me opened up his computer and connected to the network on the plane, and I'm sitting behind him, and I'm just looking through between the seats, and I'm watching everything he's doing on his computer. 14-hour flight. I mean, bored, right? So I'm sitting here watching what he's doing on the computer, and it became real obvious that the guy was looking at financial data for his company, right? And he had the financial data open, and he was responding to emails, and he was cutting and pasting from the financial data on his computer into the emails and sending the emails. Now, think about how this works, right? It's really cool to have it, but go internet, especially if you're in international waters, is an interesting animal, right? Because what it does is it's basically, we're on Delta, so it's a Delta application. Not doesn't belong to Delta, belongs to go internet. It's a third-party application on a Delta server. The connection is through Delta to the ground, right? It then routes through whatever routing system is available. As you well know, the internet doesn't really care about what country you're in or anything else. So what I started thinking about was, okay, we're halfway over the Atlantic Ocean. How are we routing this back to his company, right? And if he's opening stuff that's actually on a server at his office, let's forget the moment that I could actually sit behind him and take pictures of the screens, right, and steal the data that way. How many opportunities are there for his data to be stolen as he's sending emails and logging into the server? Because he did log into the server at his company to look at some stuff. And I have his password, by the way, when he did that. But think about that. How many different ways are there to hack that? I mean, we have no idea. First off, you could hack it on the plane. That's easy. Secondly, you could hack it from the plane to the ground. Thirdly, what country did it end up in? And whose laws are we providing there? The fact that his company's in Salt Lake and he's on a plane over, Greenland, or next to Greenland, how much did that come into play here? So you start to get into some issues with federal law and various other things, and international law around internet safety and cybercrime is not set. So it's a very interesting scenario as to who would even come into play if he said, well, my data got stolen. Which country would you actually go to talk to about the data being stolen? So it's really interesting. So with that, what I'd like to do is just ask you what questions you have and what things are concerning you about what's going on with cyber, and I'll be happy to talk to you about various things that are happening in industry. If you have just a general question about, what are we doing with industry right now, I'll be happy to answer those as well. But I figure there's so much here to cover, I'd stop there and let you ask anything if you had any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to keep talking. Go ahead.
Something come to me as a user, general user. What's the first aid you can work on your station? Make sure it's clean.
Well, I will tell you this. The very first thing that and I know people, it gets a bad rap, but the reality is you should have antivirus on your computer. It's amazing how much it will catch. We did a study about 6-7 years ago, and we found that 98% of people, 98% of potential hacks and stuff, can be stopped with a simple user ID and password. Now, not simple like the word password, but a simple user ID and password can stop about 98% of the hacks that happen. The other 2% you can't stop, okay? These are professional hackers. They know what they're doing, and they're going to get in if they want to get in. But for us as individuals, you also have a needle in the haystack issue. The average person is not going to get their computer hacked simply because there are so many opportunities to hack and so many bigger fish in the ocean that you're generally not going to get hacked. Now, like I said, don't go and put your computer on the internet thinking I don't need antivirus software because nobody's going to hack me. They'll hack you, okay? Whether they steal something or not is a good question. Because it doesn't, like if you've got $200 in your checking account, chances are somebody's not going to steal that. Will they steal your identity? Sure, right? If you've got be very careful. If on your computer you have your social security number, your address, your telephone numbers, your driver's license number, and all that stuff on your computer, recognize that that's probably already been accessed by someone. The other problem you have is when you go to, we have what's called aggregate profiling. You familiar with aggregate profiling? Aggregate profiling means that as you shop and do all the stuff on the internet, you will put different bits of information on all these different websites. You'll never give everybody everything on you, but you can go in and pick up information on people from around the world. Simple example for you. In the United States, excuse me, in the U.S., a credit card number, if you get a credit card receipt when you use your credit card at a restaurant or gas or anything else, the first 4 digits are shown. Is that right? First 4 are shown in the last 12 are not. No, the last 4 are shown and the first 12 are not in the U.S., okay? If you go to Korea, the first 4 are shown and the last 12 are not, right? So this came up for me because I was traveling in Korea and I went, how hard would it be to access the middle 8 numbers if I knew the first 4 and the last 4? So we ran a test to see how quickly you could do it. You can do it in about 2 hours, okay? With a decent computer, decent laptop and stuff, right software, you can access it in about 2 hours, okay? So as we use the internet and do various things in different places, I've had a number of people who've had their identity stolen who've come back and said, I'm very careful, I've never given all my information on any one site. Well, that's true, but you've given enough information for somebody to run an aggregate profile on you and be able to pick it up. It's not easy. I mean, it's not simple software, but it is doable. So the first thing, by all means, is make sure you have antivirus. The second thing is never download something that looks suspicious, okay? If it didn't come from somebody you know, don't download it. If it did come from someone you know and it doesn't look right, call them or send them a separate email. I did this with my daughter about 2 weeks ago. I got an email from her, no headers, no nothing. Hey, Dad, look at this site. And it was, sent this thing. I was like, yeah, like I'm going to click on that. And so I emailed her back and said, hey, did you send this? And she emailed me back and said, yeah. I was like, you know better than that. You know I'm not going to open something like that, But I had another one from a friend of mine, a professor at another university that sent one, and I emailed him, and he said, no, I didn't send that. I said, well, then your email's been hacked. And so he sent out an email to everybody saying, hey, my email's been hacked, don't open this, blah, 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 blah. But, you just got to pay attention to what's out there. If it doesn't look right, it's probably not. Yeah.
What about iPad and antivirus? How does that work?
Okay, so the big thing with Apple has always been that Apple couldn't be hacked. And so you didn't need to worry about everything. That's totally bogus, by the way. Apple gets hacked all the time. The question becomes one of what do you want to do with like an iPad and stuff. There are applications, like for instance, I have an Android phone, and on my Android phone I run Lookout and Lookout software. And I let Lookout manage all of that on my phone. As soon as I get a new phone, the first app I put on is Lookout, because it scans all the apps that I get looking for viruses embedded in the apps, and it also monitors my phone. So if something happens, I know it's there. You can do the same thing for iPads and iPhones. It's not quite as easy, but they do have applications out there to do that, and I would encourage you to do it, to have something running in the background. The problem with an iPad is that if it gets hacked, the only thing you can do is factory reset it. There aren't any options for cleaning it or anything else. You really have to factory reset. And it's the same thing with an iPhone, by the way. I mean, people tell you that, I can clean the viruses and do all this kind of stuff. But if you look at the data, rarely ever can you get everything off of an iPhone. So, the good software, the good bad software that knows how to hack an iPhone it's going to bury itself, and it's not going to go unless you factory reset. What else?
So there's a lot of talk about smart cities.
About what?
Smart cities and how Wi-Fi is needed for risky governments to use. So how will we manage the security of that in the future? Because I think that's going to be a huge concern for users when they're using public Wi-Fi.
Yeah, so we're getting it. So when we talk about smart cities, we're really talking about Internet of Things, right? And as you get into the Internet of Things, everything changes, okay? Traditional networks, traditional software, traditional cell phones and everything else are designed around you being the end user. So the idea is that whatever's happening, you're either instigating it or it ends with you, right? But when we talk about smart cities and Internet of Things, that's no longer the case. In that case, you become part of the network, and the intelligence is actually built into the network. So what's happening, and I'll give you a simple example of this. If you have a standard irrigation system at your house, right? What happens is you have a central controller, and the central controller tells the water to turn on or turn off on whatever you set the time to be. That's a fairly standard one. In the Internet of Things, each one of those sensors out in your yard, or each one of the sprinkler heads out in your yard is going to have a sensor on it. That sensor is going to be measuring the moisture content of the ground, and the sensor can override the central unit. When the central unit says water, your sensor might sit there and say, I don't need any more water. Everything's good, so I'm going to override that. On the other hand, as we get into Internet of Things, that sensor can say, hey, I'm too dry, and I know I'm not set to water until 10 o'clock tonight, but I need water now. And it can override the central controller. So the intelligence is built into the sensor, it's built into the network. And as we move to smart cities, that same thing is going to happen. Now, the negative side of that is that we look at that and we go, okay, well, that means you just created millions and millions and millions of access points for people to hack the network. True, okay? But that also means that we now have certain key components that have to be defined as where we're going to catch those that come in. So once again, you can't do a firewall concept around a city. It doesn't work, right? But what you can do is do vulnerability analysis. You can look at if there's been an access breach. So you can look at data breach connections. You can look at various other things. And you can speed up the response because as we push the intelligence into the network, it doesn't have to wait for a central response to respond. So basically what we're doing is we're writing antivirus applications, right? So they're intelligent applications, intelligent apps that simply exist within the network, within the intelligence of the network. And as they proceed or find something that they think is incorrect, they can quarantine it. If they find that it's a known signature, they'll delete it or destroy it, but they'll also track it. For the things that we need to do. So that's what we're working on now. We have a number of those to work on the Internet of Things as we're doing it with sensor-based. One that I'm really excited about that we're working on right now, and that is what's called a homing pigeon. And a homing pigeon application, what it does is it'll identify a bad app, right? It'll quarantine it in such a way that the app has to be pushed off the network, pushed off that particular network. And as it goes, if it is a retrieving bot, meaning that whoever sent it out has it grab something and retrieve it back to them, then it'll actually embed a secret or a private web application into what goes back, and it's just a tracer. So you as a network can then trace it back. We don't destroy it. We let it go back to wherever its home base was, but then we have the routing that got it back there, and we know where it was. And in that case, one of the fun things was we wrote an application that when that happens, it's called atomic war. And so when that happens, you just unload and completely destroy whatever the base is that it goes back to. Now, that's a lot of fun. The only problem with it is that if it's hopping through different networks, you get to destroy everybody else's networks while you're doing it. So part of the thing is writing stuff that actually, we write stuff and then we try to counter it. And then we counter the counter, and we go back and forth. And so that's what a lot of what NSA and DOD and stuff are doing right now is that. Whereas 5 or 6 years ago, everything was written around cybersecurity as a science and trying to figure out how to replicate everything. What we've discovered is that cybersecurity is not a science, it's an art. And the creativity is what allows the hacks to take place. Once again, 97% behavioral, 3% technology. What else?
Going back to your question on public access, try to speak up about public access, open Wi-Fi networks. If I take an analogy from public health, common sense public health policy dictates we need to vaccinate. At some point, our network service providers and the free Wi-Fi providers, for example, need to monitor their networks and provide tools like AT&T, for example, provides Outlook. At some point, that needs to be required. Right now, it's just some service providers provide that to their end users, many don't. It's the wild, wild west.
Well, and one of the things to understand is when we created the internet, back in the late 60s, as the internet started to get created, the idea was to create an open network. It was never intended to have security built into the network. It just wasn't perceived as being an issue. Because of that, the traditional internet has that weakness. When we start working on I2 and some of the next gen stuff, the networks in those cases are having security built into them. And that will help because that will drive some of this. But I will tell you that you can build all the security you want into the network itself. Everything has a backdoor. Everything has a weakness. And we can find a way to get into it. As long as if it's an open city or a smart city, how are you going to tell somebody they can't be part of it? Right? We talk about self-driving cars. Self-driving cars are fascinating. And I look at it probably a little bit different than everybody else in the fact of if you have a smart city and you have self-driving cars in the city of Salt Lake, that's one thing because everybody's on the same network and they're doing stuff. What if I drive in from Las Vegas? Okay, you got to have a seamless handoff between your cities and between your networks for that self-driving car to work. Otherwise, when I come into the network, what do? I'm like a pinball, right? I'm hitting every car on the highway. And so the question becomes, how do you do that handoff seamlessly in such a way that I'm still safe, I can connect into the network? And you're right. What you have to do is you have to you can't make the assumption that I'm coming into the network and I'm clean. You've got to scan me. You've got to do whatever you need to do in order to let me into the network as clean, right? That's a whole different animal than just saying we're going to have self-driving cars.
It's like saying it's unlikely that the Secret Service would ever let the President of the United States ride in a self-driving car.
Well, yeah, that's not going to happen. That is not going to happen. So, it's interesting. I was in a presentation. I was at a TED conference, and one of the gentlemen speaking spoke about the fact that to really be safe, we should do away with pilots and aircraft in commercial jetliners. It's a fascinating TED talk, right? Because his point was that if you look at a jet today, the pilot is really redundant, right? The jet really flies itself. Everything is done computerized. It's all connected to the ground. Everything flies itself. And this guy's he's a commercial pilot. And he said, he goes, our job is basically to be there in case something goes wrong. And I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm good so far. And he said, but he was talking about the flight that crashed in Europe. And that was a situation where the pilot overrode the system and the pilot crashed the plane. And he said, if you didn't have a pilot in the plane, that wouldn't have happened. And he gave brilliant talk. I mean, really good talk. And he got to the end of it and he said, now how many of you would fly in a plane with no pilot? And nobody raised their hands, right? And he died laughing. He goes, that's the problem. He said, we believe that you got to have that human being there. We don't trust the system. Yet the reality is the system's probably better than the human that's in there. And that's an interesting approach to it. But the Internet of Things is going to make that decision absolutely critical. Because the Internet of Things, we are no longer the superior entity creating and making things happen in the end user. We're now part of the network. And like I told you, we do vulnerability analysis, and the vulnerability analysis tells us that the most vulnerable part of the network is what? You, right? Is the human component in the network. So we have to rethink how that works. And so part of what we've been working on now is this issue of, looking at it differently, I guess is the easiest way to say it, is the network, the IP protocol that creates the network. That is the baseline under which we all work, right? That's the network component. That's what allows all the networks to interact with one another. The human being is the creative component that goes on top of it. Now, historically, we've always said that the network, the logic, and the creative are diametrically opposed. That's not really true, right? And if you're going to do Internet of Things, then you've got to find a way for the creative and the logic to work together. And people go, well, isn't that I had a lady ask me a couple of weeks ago, she said, well, I heard you make this presentation. She said, but when you create the logic and the creativity, she goes, isn't that a human being? And I went, I don't know. I said, I think that's a really interesting question, right? I have one of my students right now that's doing a big project on if we give machines the ability to think and make decisions for themselves, but then we only let them make the decisions we tell them to, is that not slavery, and does that not violate the 14th Amendment of the Constitution? And I told him, I said, this ought to be good. I told him, I said, write it up. Let's see what you come up with. And so he's researching that right now. Those are questions, and I know you sit here and you go, wow, those are science fiction questions, what if, total academic questions. And to a great extent, you're right, now. But 5 years from now, they're not going to be. 5 years from now, it's going to be really interesting. What happens if you're in a self-driving car and you see an accident, you see something that you go, that's going to cause an accident, you take over the car, and because you took over the car, there's an accident, right? You go, okay, well, you're to blame, right? You did that. What if the reverse happens? What if you're driving and the car decides you're being dangerous and it takes over and causes an accident? Now who's to blame? Today, who's to blame if that happens? You are, right? You can't blame the car. You are to blame in both situations. But then you look at that and go, well, then why would I have a self-driving car? If it can cause an accident and I'm going to be held liable for it and I have no control over it, how can that be? And so those type of scenarios come into play. And the reason they're important for us right now is because if I'm writing a hack on a self-driving car, what do I want to write the hack to do? The interesting question, right?
Are you a benevolent hacker or are you a malicious hacker?
Me, personally, I'm okay right now, okay? My mental state is good, so. But it's interesting because as we talk to hackers around the world about why they hack, right? Most of the time, the answer is not insidious, right? They don't consider what they're doing to be injuring other people and stuff. It's really, from their standpoint, they're looking at it doing a what-if analysis. And they're going, what if I could do this? How would I do this? What could I, Now, granted, there are a lot of hackers out there that become non-benevolent, right? They're out there and they're insidious in what they're doing and they're hacking for a lot of different reasons. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. But when we talk to, especially young hackers, they don't understand the ramifications of what they're doing, right? So the question for like self-driving cars, for me, is a very interesting one. The bigger issue that we're dealing with right now is critical infrastructure in the United States. Critical infrastructure in the U.S. is under attack every day. There's no security on it at all, okay? So what's more dangerous, me hacking a self-driving car on I-15 or me reversing all of the pumping stations with the sewer systems in the United States, right? We had one when I was in Texas where someone went in and hacked City of Fort Worth sewer line, a pumping station, and pumped 360,000 gallons of raw sewage into a neighborhood, okay? And it was a hack. It was a remote hack. It was done it was just a very interesting hack, but it was a hack, right? And everybody was upset. And at the end of the day, you go, wow, 360,000, it could have been way worse. Yes, it could have been, okay? Probably not to the people whose homes got filled with raw sewage. But to everybody else, it could have been way worse. But what it showed the city of Fort Worth was how easy it was to hack one of their systems, right? And we went out and did some inspections there, vulnerability analysis, asset inventory. And we found on half a dozen of their remote stations, somebody had hacked the station. They had literally put in physical antenna. So the data was feeding back to somebody else's remote site. And so we pulled all that down. And you think about it, these pumping stations have what? They have a chain link fence. They have a lock on them. There's no cameras. There's no 24-hour security or anything else. Because you sit there and go, who in their right mind wants to hack a sewer station? But the reality is that they do. Now think about if I could take down a power grid, right? So there's some very interesting ways to look at these things. And like I said, people always come up to me and they go, your presentations are so depressing. They shouldn't be, right? because we are working on all this stuff. We are aware of the things that are going on. And given, the size of the internet and how much things are changing, the number of hacks out there are minuscule, but they are increasing. And you do need to take some basic precautions. Like I said, 98% of hackers will be stopped by a simple ID and password, right? The other 2% you can't stop, so we have to come up with a different way of preventing the hacks. All right? Anything else?
Well, then, in your opinion, do you believe that someday soon that we will live in a hack-free environment?
The short answer is no, because I think the word hack has a lot of various meanings, okay? There are good hacks, right? And that's part of the problem is that we have. We all like shortcuts, right? And so if you get a shortcut and you can hack the system, I do it at UVU all the time, right? Because they just have too many rules and regulations and they can't get out of their way. Now, what I'm doing, I'm very careful not to violate any of the policies and procedures, right, of the university. But there are situations where, like for instance, I'm not supposed to upgrade my own notebook, right? I'm the dean of the College of Technology and Computing, okay? So I'm supposed to sit there and go, my notebook doesn't work. I'm supposed to call IT services, have them come in and fix it for me. I call IT and go, hey, my computer's broken. It's doing this, this, and this. I'm going to fix it by doing this, this, and this. And they go, okay, right? Now, technically, that's a hack, right? I'm violating something. Do I think we're going to live in a hack-free world? The answer is no, okay? Do I think we can limit the impact of hacks? Yes, I do. I think what we're working on at the federal level, some of what the international programs are working on, I think we will get to a point where we can limit the damage that hacks do because we can proactively respond to a hack literally before it happens. And there are ways to do that. And we've done a couple, especially with groups out of Australia and stuff, where really good detective work has identified a hack that was going to happen in a week. Before it happened, they rounded up everybody, they got them arrested, and they stopped the hack from happening. That's what we're going to have to do. But that requires a different way of approaching security, cybersecurity, going forward. But I do think we're going to see that. And I think the smart city concept, the Internet of Things, is the platform that's going to allow us to do that. But we've got to get more creative in what we're doing.
So are those like the OPM and the IRS hacks, were those ones that then sat dormant for, I'm hearing like the OPM one sat out there for,
Almost 5 years. Yeah. We think it may have been as long as 5 years on OPM, that it sat and waited. And now what triggered it is what we're trying to figure out right now. The IRS gets hacked about 4,000 times a day. Okay, I'm not exaggerating. They get about 4,000 hack attempts a day at the IRS. The one at the IRS we believe was internal, that someone planted it inside of the IRS, which is not surprising. But that one's pretty much been identified as a behavioral hack, not a technology hack. OPM one was a technology hack, a very good one. So that's one that, like I said, we're trying to figure out why it sat dormant for so long. That's the big issue with that one.
Are there any trends in behavioral hacks on today?
Say that one more time.
What are the trends with behavioral hacks that get people to not be stupid?
Well, I think one of the things I think is that as we move from you as the end user to you as a part of the network in the Internet of Things, then I think behavior will change with that, and we'll be used to working in that environment. So the behavioral hacks occur because we do something stupid that doesn't, and I say stupid, by stupid what I mean is we do something that's illogical. So it creates a disconnect between the logic of the network and the illogical act of what we did. So illogical being, we told you to change your password to make it secure, but you taped your password to your monitor. That's illogical, right? That's an easy one to fix if we go to biometrics, right? If we go to biometrics, you no longer have a password. You are the password, right? So as we put you into the network, we're going to create things that allow you to become part of the network. And so you don't have to worry so much about your passwords. You will simply work as you yourself will be the password. And there's some interesting dynamics around that as well. But if you saw the last Mission Impossible movie with Tom Cruise, they came running out of the building and the girl slammed her hand on the car and the car opened and started, okay? That's a biometric password. And you're gonna see more and more of those happening. And you're just gonna, I mean, people go, I don't want everybody to know my, my iris scan, or I don't want them to know my fingerprints are worthless, by the way, just so you know. I mean, they're a great little app to have on your iPhone and stuff, but they are worthless. You have to go through great lengths to have high identification on a fingerprint to make it unique. On an iPhone, the average iPhone fingerprint scanner, there are 200 people in the world that can unlock that phone, okay? So when you set up your password and go, it's just me, now there's 200 other people in the world that can actually access your phone as well, okay? And it has nothing to do with your being unique. You are unique. It's just that we're not doing enough scan to get the uniqueness, okay? Anything else?
Just maybe obvious observation with such a large percentage of the problems being behavioral, the key way to address that is education. And typically when you deal with IT departments, at least unsophisticated ones, their first solution is some sort of a device that you would plug into the network. It's going to make the network secure. And if you don't spend the budget to educate your users the way we do with sexual harassment and other things, then
No, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that's what we're trying to change, right? Is this idea that if I buy a bigger firewall, if I go get the latest Barracuda firewall, I'm going to solve my problem. No, well, you're only going to solve 3% of your problem at best, right? The other 90% is behavioral. You have to educate your employees on what's proper and what's not proper. It was interesting to watch this guy on the plane because I'm sitting there thinking, as a CEO, I'm assuming he was a CEO, as a CEO, you should know better. You should know not to access your server from an airplane, okay? But people sit there and go, well, I needed the data, and I needed it now, so blah, blah, blah. Well, that's the education we've got to get to with people of going, look, understand the risk. I'm not saying you can never do it. What I'm saying is understand the risk of the activity you're undertaking. And I think as people become more, we get more into the Internet of Things, people will become more comfortable with the technology around them. We're already seeing it in children, how comfortable they are with technology. And as that happens, it will just be part of their behavior coming up. But we have probably another 10 to 15 years to go before we see that full behavioral modification. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you. I appreciate it.